Good evening. Our speaker tonight will be Zane Copeland. Zane is in his 15th year of preaching throughout Oklahoma, and he's done mission work in Mongolia. His wife, Kristen, has been by his side for all of his work. He has been blessed with 3 beautiful children, Sophia, Aaliyah, and William. He graduated from Freed-Hardeman with a bachelor's degree in Bible and completed his master's at Bear Valley Institute in Denver. He has taught in numerous countries to numerous preachers. He has also spoke at many seminars and workshops and gospel meetings. He is currently serving as the preacher at the Lord's Congregation in Miami, however you want to say it. You know, I mess up it all the time. And they're in Miami, Oklahoma. Zane is someone that me and Dane really look up to in our ministry. He has helped Dane along the way, and Dane has passed that down to me along the way, and I love him and his family very much. I actually got to see him at the Freed-Hardeman lectureships, and it was really nice to connect with him again, and his family is very awesome, and I love them very much, and so I really hope you guys really take in what he speaks tonight from God's Word, and we just apply it to our lives. So Zane, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, brother. Well, good evening. I agree with everything he said about me. My wife did write it, so it better be true. No, feel like we know a little bit about y'all already. I love whoever did this. Someone wrote an encouraging note up here. Yeah. I was Dane's first internship, and so we spent the summer together in Leedy, and he worked with our youth group. I taught him on preaching. At that point, he had not focused on that part of the work yet, and so he did bulletin articles. I don't know if we had a funeral, but we did hospitals, everything you can imagine together in that one summer. It was a great summer, and very grateful for how that solidified my bond to the Berkey family. I was asked tonight to speak on one of the parables of Jesus, and we're focusing on the parable of the rich ruler. If you'll turn to Luke chapter 12. And I've never been accused of being quiet, but about an hour and a half ago, I started something new today. I taught the 3rd to 5th graders this morning, and then we had both of our services before this. So this is our 3rd or 4th, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm very excited for microphones tonight. If you have your wallet, if you have cash, if you have a credit card, if you pay through your phone or tap to pay through your watch, whatever you have, if you can get to it quickly, pull it out. And I'll just go around and no, just kidding. Pull it out. And I want you to try something with me. With $1, it's really difficult. With a credit card, it's difficult. Maybe your watch should be the easiest, but try it with me to put this in front of your eyes. And now look around the congregation and see how many people you can see. With the dollar bill, it is almost impossible. With the credit card, it's a little better. Maybe your watch, you could see a few people. Now, if you want to take it one step further, and you've already turned to Luke chapter 12, see how much of the text you can see. I can't see a thing in the text, and I barely saw it in my peripheral, one of y'all over here. You see, God's word does not condemn money, as has been oft misquoted. The love of money is the root of all evil. God's word does not condemn money. It's when we make money our focus. If we put our jobs, our stuff is going to be probably our big word tonight, because money is, sometimes we can say, I don't have a money problem. Okay, then put your keys in front, put your house key in front, whatever it might be, because we got a lot of stuff that's our problem. The newest phone, the newest car, the newest house, the newest tractor, the newest four-wheeler, the newest boat, the newest exercise program, diet program, medication, whatever it might be that they've got, I need to try it because they say it's good and they know more than me, and I can't have them beat me to it. Stuff, when we put it in front of us, is the problem. It is not that stuff is the problem. It's that when we put it in front of our eyes, it's the problem. You see, if I look around right now, I can see all kinds of y'all, yet I still have the money. I could give this money out to help someone. I could give this money out to do a work of the Lord. I could give this money the contribution plate, and it's not getting in front of my eyes because my eyes are still on God and His people. Our text is the condemnation of putting stuff first instead of God first. We are in Luke chapter 12, the parable of the rich fool. And in this chapter, I'm going to keep it simple, so I'm going to tell you at the beginning what we're going to do. We're going to do four things. We're going to look at the problem, the purpose, the parable, and the point. The problem is there are either one or two covetous brothers who cannot agree on how to divide the inheritance. If you want to define the Old Testament into two things, it is love God and love your neighbor. That's what Jesus told us, right? You want to define the Old Testament into 10 things. It's an expounding of how to love God and an expounding of how to love your neighbor in the 10 Commandments. You want to blow up the 10 Commandments and make them bigger, you go into Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and it's just an explanation of how to keep the 10 Commandments, which are keeping the 2 commandments, which is love. Love God, love each other. Well, one of those 10 Commandments was covetousness. And I love the way the covetousness is described in the 10 Commandments, because often when we think of the 10 Commandments, we put it way too simply, and it's just because we're trying to memorize it as a child. Thou shalt not covet. That's not the 10th commandment. It says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's servant, thy neighbor's wife, thy neighbor's ox, thy neighbor's ass, Old King James, thy neighbor's, and you go on and on and on and on. It names everything. How would we say that today? Don't covet your neighbor's tractor. Don't covet your neighbor's barn. Don't covet your neighbor's boat. Don't covet your neighbor's beautiful wife. That's what he's talking about there. Coveting, we can covet a lot of things. We have one or two covetous brothers here. And so the problem is they cannot agree. Let's look at the problem now. Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made you a judge? Who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" The reason why we know covetousness is involved in this is this should not be a difficult conversation. How to divide the inheritance is not like it is today. Today, when we think about dividing the inheritance, I read a survey for a different sermon that talked about one of the biggest fights amongst family has to do with how to divide up money. The biggest fights that we have with our family is after someone dies, statistically. Isn't that horrible? Mama loved us all these years, now let's fight about Mama's stuff. But it shouldn't have been that way in the Old Testament, because Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17 shows us something. Now, I want you to understand, this chapter is not actually giving out this type of rules. This type of rule was just known amongst the people. This chapter is actually talking about a guy that married multiple wives. Woo! You know, the Bible talks about that He has given us all things that are needed for life and godliness. Any life problem we have is going to be talked about in the Bible. When our government starts pushing polygamy, it's already been talked about in the Bible. We can find passages that tell us it doesn't work out good. One wife gets mistreated while the other one gets loved. One's considered beautiful while the other one's considered ugly. That's the harsh truth of polygamy. Well, what happens is he likes one, he doesn't like the other, and so he reminds them of the rule. Chapter 21, verse 17, but he acknowledged the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him, but he shall. In other words, keep doing the rule even if you don't love that woman. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. We're actually looking at the exception here, not the rule. The exception is you don't love one wife and you don't want to take care of that kid. That's mean. But it's true with polygamy. And these days with his, hers, and our marriage that many of us have, sometimes we might not love one of our children as much. That's mean. But it's happened. It happened in the Bible. It's always happened. So what happens, he says, is keep the rule. The rule of the firstborn is the firstborn always gets a double portion. What does that mean? 66%. Okay? So if you have 14 boys, the other 13 have to fight over the other 33%. If you have two sons, like this man we're looking at in this passage, one gets 66%, the other gets 33%. It's easy to find out the answer. They should not have had this debate. There should not have been a problem. It should have been as simple as, I'm the oldest, 66%. I'm the youngest, 33%. What happened? Envy, covetousness. One brother either said, I want more even though I'm the youngest, or the older brother said, I'm not giving you anything. Or maybe both. We either have one covetous brother or two covetous brothers in this passage. You see, there's no problem with having stuff as long as we don't put stuff in front of our eyes to where we can't see our neighbor, our brother, our God. But as soon as we stop loving our God, our brother, and our neighbor, then stuff has gotten in the way. And guess what happened between these brothers? Stuff got in the way between their relationship. So that's the problem. Now we're going to look at the purpose. The purpose is watch out for covetousness, because stuff doesn't make up your life. Take care, verse 15, Luke 12. He said to them, take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. You will not define yourself at the end of your life, and you should not define yourself in the middle of your life by, I've got a lot of stuff, therefore I am great. One's life is not defined in how many new pairs of shoes, how many purses, how many cars, and how many acres I own. Stuff does not make the life. 1 Timothy chapter 6 shows us the opposite of this. 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 8. For if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Now, do you remember the churches of Ephesus and Revelation? The church in Laodicea is famous for one particular reason. Most of us, when we think of Revelation chapter 3, the church in Laodicea, we probably think about they're the vomit church. He says, I know your works are neither cold nor hot. Would you either be cold or hot? Because you're lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. That's what we focus on when we don't keep reading. Why is it that they're not hot or cold? Why are they not on fire for the Lord? Are y'all on fire for the Lord? Do we want this to be a church that not only loves each other, but loves the world and loves souls and grows for the Lord? How do you get on fire? He tells us the reason they weren't on fire. They weren't on fire because you say, I am rich. I have prospered. I need nothing. Not realizing you're wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you, if you're looking at your clothes, looking at your wealth, looking at your life, and you're saying, you know what? I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. The American way. He says, I counsel you, here's what you need to do. Buy something more important. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may be rich. White garments, so you may clothe yourself of the shame of your nakedness and not be seen. Salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. Those whom I love I reprove and discipline. He said, I'm telling you, if you are thinking you're rich while also thinking you're a Christian, you're not hot for God and you're not cold to God. You're trying to stay in the lukewarm middle. Christians, no matter how young, old, rich, or poor we are, we need to be on fire for the Lord. Living every day like it could be our last, but also living every day like it could be our relative and neighbor's last day. And you might be the only chance they have to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, to feel the love of Christ, to see the servanthood of a Christian. Be on fire. How do we get on fire? Stop looking at this and realize we're naked, we're pitiable, we're wretches, and He wants to clothe us in the white garments. You know, the rich young ruler in Luke chapter 18, he's one of those guys that reminds us a lot of this same man. It's almost hard to say the parable of the rich fool without saying the parable of the rich young ruler. They're not the same, but it reminds us of each other. This rich young ruler comes to him and he says, I've obeyed all the commandments. And he says, oh, have you? Yeah, I've obeyed all the commandments. Then give up everything and give it to the poor. Was Jesus saying that's the only way to get to heaven is if we walk around with nothing in our pockets, no money, no car, no nothing? No, he was seeing that this was this man's sin. This was this man's temptation. What does he see when he looks at you? What's your temptation? We've all got one. James talks about that we need to have manifold temptations. We need to grow to where Satan has to come up with new ones. And a lot of them, multicolored temptations. If we're still stuck on the same temptation we were stuck on 20 years ago, it's time to move on. Beat that one. Let Satan look for a new one. What's your temptation? That was what that young man's temptation was. Judas in Matthew 26. Why did he betray the Lord? Money. Ananias and Sapphira, Acts chapter 5. Why did they try to lie to the Holy Spirit? Covetousness. What did they covet? Money in their pocket while also coveting looking like a Christian. We can look like a Christian every single Sunday while greedily holding on to our money and not be one, being hot and cold at the same time. That was Ananias and Sapphira. Achan in Joshua chapter 7, nobody knew it, but he had stole and hid it underneath his tent, the money. And all of God's people around him were being condemned for his sin. We can have an influence for the negative if we hold on to what is not ours. False teachers in Jude verses 11 and 12, they were chasing after money, and that's why they were teaching things that weren't true. Oh, James chapter 5 verse 4 hurts my heart. The rich brethren were not paying their day laborers. The bosses were not paying their employees, and these employees were literally dying because they were not being taken care of by their bosses. And then Luke chapter 19, 45 to 46, you remember Jesus ran the money changers out of the temple who had started becoming so obsessed with money, they were putting it in the way of worship. Another day for another time, but You know, when Jesus runs them out of the temple, what part of the temple that was? That was the temple where the Gentiles could be. If you were a Gentile, you didn't have a chance to go into any other part of the temple. That was the only place you could go, and yet somebody else was running your worship by their covetousness. So first of all, we see the point. The point is, don't be covetous, because life does not consist of money. Now the parable. Let's look at the parable of Luke 12. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. In this parable, we find a rich man who became richer, and he thought that all the wealth of life would be what was most important. Life consists of wealth. That was this man's motto. And he said, you know what? I've got enough wealth. I'm going to have a good life. And God said, your life is going to be taken from you this very day. I want us to focus on some lessons from this parable that we can apply to ourselves. The first thing I want you to notice is this man was self-centered. Self-centered. Listen to this. The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Notice just the word I there is used 12 times. I and my, 12 times. Him talking to himself. Everything about life was about how it's going to help me. If we have wealth, use it for the Lord. We all have wealth of some sort. Use it for the Lord. I'm reminded of the passage that we often talk about with giving on the first day of the week. It says, give as you have prospered, every one of you. What does that tell you? Every one of us prosper. Whether I prosper a nickel and you prosper 5,000, we both have wealth that we prosper, and God expects us to use it. That's talking about giving on the first day of the week, but so is true with our daily things we do for God. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, the earth is the Lord and all it contains. It's not I, me, my. It's not my crops, my barns, my, like that man kept saying. It's all his. Psalm 50, verse 10, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. They're all his. Haggai 2, verse 8, you say to yourself, hey, I'm not getting in trouble with this sermon. I don't have crops and I don't have animals. Haggai 2:8, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. Oh no, he found us too, didn't he? The land is God's, the seed is God, the grain is God's, the growth is God, the wealth is God's. And so this rich man had everything wrong because he thought the seed was mine, the land was mine, the crop was mine, the field was mine, everything was mine, and it all is God's. Now I want you to notice one more thing about the me, my, mine, moo, my, moo. You know, you hear all that from that guy. I want you to notice something about it. It's actually not only illogical because it's all God's. He had plenty of room in barns. He said, I don't have enough room in my barns. Let me tear down bigger barns. So the problem was he kept saying, my. What if he had said, I don't have room in my barns, but There is a widow's barns, there's the poor barns, there's the young married's barns, there's the young parents' barns, there's their suffering sick barns, there's the elderly who cannot work barns. If we looked around for all the other barns, we'd have a place to store all our stuff. We wouldn't have to go rent a storage unit because there's someone else down the road that's in need of it. John Hines. You probably think about him with ketchup or with Heinz 57. Actually, he's the pickle guy. Originally, he was the pickle man. He made a fortune selling pickles. But I want you to hear his motto. Because money is not inherently wrong. Listen to this motto. God first, others second, pickles third. Isn't that a good motto? A man that can make multi-thousands, back then probably, now multi-millions upon millions, on pickles, did it by saying God first, others second, then pickles third. He was self-centered, and that was this man's problem. The second thing is he was the all-knowing. He was omniscient, he thought, right? He thought in terms of, he said, I have many years, God said, this night. He said, I'm going to keep all these things. God said, it will be taken from you. He said, I'm going to say to my soul, take it easy. God said, your soul's about to take off. He thought in terms of this life. God said, next to life. You know, James chapter 4, 13 to 17 talk about those that make plans without God. This is where we get the phrase in the South where we say, Lord willing. What's that phrase actually talking about? It's talking about making plans with God in the forefront of our mind. Those who seek money first will lose it all. Matthew 6, 19 and 20. Wealth should be employed, not just enjoyed. Our wealth has a job. Use it as a tool for the Lord. It's His anyways. Number 3, he was feeding his soul the wrong food. You remember those Beatitudes? Happy is, happy is, happy is, blessed is, blessed is, blessed is. Well, Jesus said in in Acts chapter 20, verse 35, he said, Jesus said in Acts 20, 35? Yeah. They record to us a saying of Jesus, blessed or happy is those who give than receive. More happy are those who give than receive. He was constantly feeding his soul, if I had this, if I had this, if I had this, my soul will be happy. And he thought, I'm going to say to my soul, eat, drink, and be merry. You're going to be so happy when I give you all this stuff. Is that true? Think about it in your own life. I get the new iPhone 59, and next month, iPhone 60 is being advertised. I get the 2026 BMW. No, I don't, but maybe you do. I get the new 2026 BMW, and what are they already telling you? Oh, that car's no good. Now we've got an electric 26 BMW that has more horsepower. Stuff doesn't make you happy. If we only feed our soul stuff, our soul will never actually have that blessedness. If only I had a better job, I'd be happy. How many of us whine and complain about our jobs and our bosses and this and that? If only I had a better job, I'd be happy. If only I had more money, I'd be happy. If I had this new car, I'd be happy. If I had this new outfit, I'd be happy. If I had this new house, phone, TV, subscription plan, mower, purse, silverware, hat, food, dessert, drink, soda, candy, popcorn, and cookie dough, I'd be happy. And guess what? The next morning I wake up with a sore stomach, the mower breaks, the hat wears out, the silverware is tarnished, we put one down the disposal. The subscription plan ain't all it was stacked up to be, and the price jumps the next month. The TV is outdated, and so is the phone. And our house, it's Oklahoma. The ground shifted, and it cracks. Stuff is not what we feed our souls. The fourth lesson we find from this man is he thought, I'm too young, I'm too healthy, I'm too important to die. This man said to himself, I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. God said, you got one night. Don't we try to think those same things? We think, if I'm healthy enough, if I exercise enough, if I eat the right vitamins, if I do the right things, if I'm heart healthy and conscious, I will not die. I want you to imagine the people of the town of this rich man, what they wrote on his tombstone and what they said for his epitaph. They said, here lies a great man of society, who every son should grow up to be like. A man who is an upstanding member of this society that helped every citizen. No, didn't help. That had more wealth than every citizen and that had all that we hope to have. Here's what God wrote on his epitaph. Here lies a fool on his way to punishment. I can imagine dads when this man will walk through the streets will point out to their sons and say, grow up to be like him one day, son. And God says, please don't. And then finally, from the parable we learn, he invested in riches that lose their value. Some riches will grow in value, some will decrease. His decreased very quickly that night. In one night. Could you imagine losing everything in one night? I know when the bubbles burst, some of us lose quite a bit. Whether it's in housing market, whether it's when nobody all of a sudden wants to buy the milk and the cattle, they're just pouring it down the drains at milk farms. Whether it's when the eggs all of a sudden are no longer considered healthy and they have to dump them. Could you imagine, though, losing everything in one night? This man lost everything in one night. Why? Because he invested in the wrong riches. That's what Revelation chapter 3 told us about the church at Laodicea. We think, I'm so rich, and Jesus says, you're naked. I've got the best, and he says, no, you don't. Whose finances will yours be after death, is what God says to this man. They don't even know who will divide it up because no one loves you enough to care. Where's his family? Where's his children? None of them are mentioned. Where's his neighbors? Nobody knows. They won't even know who to divide it up with at the end. There was a person who broke into a store at night one night, and he went through and he changed all the labels. I must have been a teenager, right? Changed all the labels because they didn't steal anything. They just did something silly, a prank. They changed all the labels in the store, and the next morning you walk in and it's got the expensive watches that say 75 cents. It's got the hair barrettes that say $50. Nothing was valued correctly. That's what we often do in this life. We look at and we say the stuff is the most valuable thing, and then we say godliness is the least valuable thing. And God says, you're misreading the label. That stuff is invaluable. This stuff is the most valuable. All right, so we had our parable, and finally our point. Jesus gives us the point. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich to God. Don't lay up treasure on earth and forget God. Remember God. Use your treasure on earth. This week, I want you to change your soul's diet. I want you to look at what you've been eating, what you've been holding in front of your eyes, what you've been holding up as most important, and I want you to change what you're looking at, change your perspective, and say, I've always thought, I've been thinking about day in and day out. I've stayed up with heartburn recently about. Stop thinking about that for a moment and ask yourself, have I had heartburn about the most important things? I remember Brother Marshall Keeble said one time, I'd rather you toss and turn in your bed at night than toss and turn in hell for eternity. We toss and turn in our bed at night worrying about money, stuff, more, and I just spent that, now I need more. This week I want us to think about changing our diet. That way our soul will actually be fed at the end of time. We're going to offer an invitation. We always do that way. In case you are not yet a Christian, you can become one by believing that Jesus Christ, Son of God, turning your life to Him, confessing He is the Son of God, and being dipped, dunked, plunged, immersed in the watery grave of baptism to rise anew. Christian, I want you to think to yourself about your soul. I want you to think about your soul and make sure you are treating your soul correctly. There is a young man that saved up everything he had, as we often do, not for the house, not for the ceremony, not for the wedding, for that big old honking ring, right? He wanted her to have a great engagement ring. So he went and made payments every month, and he finally gets this multi-$1,000 wedding ring. They put it in this little $1 black box. And he gets down on one knee and he pops the question, and she just is ecstatic. That's the most beautiful box I've ever seen. I've never seen a box like that box. The black is so shiny, it's so pretty. Where did you ever get the box? At a jewelry store. Let me show you what's inside. Oh yeah, that's a pretty ring. But boy, that rock box. Woo! That box is so cool. I'm going to show all my friends the box. I can't wait to snap it. Oh, and now I'm going to chat it, and now I'm going to tweet it, and now I'm going to text it. Oh, I love the box. It's so great. How would that man feel right now? That's the way God feels. We spend so much time focusing on the box, focusing on the stuff, focusing on the outside, and don't realize the important thing is on the inside. Open up the box and realize the treasure is inside. Your soul is what really matters. If you need prayers of the church, come forward as we now stand and sing.